The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Concordiat on Citadel Prime was a monument to impossible biology. Light, filtered through the station's orbital dust shield, fell in shimmering, polychromatic shafts upon a congregation that defied any single definition of life. There were the Glyptons, crystalline beings of pure silicon, whose thoughts were visible as slow, intricate pulses of light, rippling through their faceted bodies. There were the Cathar, avian creatures whose empathic state was broadcast by the hormonal flush of color across their magnificent plumage. And there were the J. Cori, vast, ammonia-based gas sacs who floated in contained atmospheric chambers, their discourse a symphony of resonant pressure waves that vibrated through the very deck plates. Dozens of other species filled the tiered alcoves, a living library of evolution's divergent masterpieces. And then there were the humans. Ambassador Xyler of the Glypton Coherency observed them from its designated plinth. Like all Glyptons, Xyler's consciousness was a distributed network within its crystalline form, and its perception was a pure, unfiltered analysis of incoming light and energy. The humans were bland. Fleshy, soft, symmetrical bipeds wrapped in simple, dark fabrics. They occupied their alcove with a quietude that bordered on unnerving. For the 50 standard cycles since their fraught first contact and subsequent probationary induction into the Concordiat, they had maintained this posture. They listened, they observed. They never spoke unless directly addressed, and even then their responses were brief, deferential, and maddeningly noncommittal. The prevailing theory among the elder species was that the humans were simply overwhelmed. They were a young race, barely a whisper in the galactic timescale, hailing from a turbulent, high-gravity death world, as their own archives quaintly termed it. Their technology was functional but clumsy. Their FTL drives brutish affairs of space-time-tearing force rather than the elegant warp folding of the Glyptons or the psionic slipstreaming of the Lumini. They were seen as children at a council of titans, wide-eyed and terrified into silence. The Concordiat, in its paternalistic wisdom, had granted them a seat not out of respect for their power, but as a gesture of inclusivity, a project to uplift a promising, if primitive, species. They were often called the listeners, or, more derisively in the private channels, the silent orphans. Today's debate centered on the Cathar, who were petitioning for exclusive nesting rights in the nebulae of the Cygnus Arm, citing ancient spiritual claims. The J. Cori were countering, their booming frequencies arguing for the nebulae's rich helium-3 deposits, essential for their species' metabolic processes. The ancestral songs are woven into the starlight of that quadrant, chirped Elder Phelan of the Cathar, his crest feathers flashing a brilliant, distressed crimson. The air around him shimmered with the pheromones of righteous indignation. To strip mine our Genesis skies is a desecration. From the J. Cori chamber, a deep, resonant wave pulsed through the hall. The material needs of the living supersede the sentimental echoes of the dead. Your songs do not fuel our internal stars. The debate raged, a tempest of conflicting biologies and philosophies. The Cathar grew more agitated, their collective plumage a frantic strobe of anxiety and anger. Xyler watched, processing the exchange with cool logic. It was a standard resource dispute, complicated by incompatible modes of thought. The Cathar operated on instinct and tradition, their arguments rooted in emotional and spiritual imperatives. The J. Cori were beings of immense, slow, geological time. Their logic was one of cosmic pragmatism. Xyler's attention drifted, as it often did, to the human alcove. Ambassador Eris Thorne sat perfectly still, her hands folded on the console before her. Her face, a soft canvas of pale skin and dark hair, was impassive. Beside her, a younger human, a technical attaché named Kenji Tanaka, stared out at the assembly. But his gaze wasn't the odd, unfocused look of a tourist. It was sharp, analytical. It darted from the Cathar's flashing feathers to the subtle pressure shifts in the J. Cori's containment field, to the way the Lumini delegates shimmered in empathetic distress. His focus was absolute. It was this detail that had always bothered Xyler. The human silence wasn't the vacant silence of incomprehension. Xyler had seen that in newly contacted proto-civilizations. That was a silence of awe, of fear, of sensory overload. The human silence was attentive. It was the stillness of something watching, something learning. An unexpected spike in the Cathar's emotional broadcast broke Zyler's concentration. A younger Cathar diplomat, overwhelmed by the J-Corey's implacable logic, had suffered a synaptic cascade failure, a panic attack. Its feathers went from crimson to a sickly, mottled gray in a split second, and it let out a high-pitched shriek that was mercifully dampened by the hall's acoustic field. Elder Phelan rushed to its side, his own plumage flashing soothing patterns of cerulean and gold, attempting to coax the younger one's nervous system back into equilibrium. It was a minor, regrettable incident, but common enough. Yet as Zyler's gaze returned to the human alcove, it saw something that sent a discordant flicker through its own crystalline matrix. Ambassador Thorne's eyes, dark and unreadable, had tracked the entire event with an unnerving precision. She had watched the initial distress flare, the cascade failure, and the soothing response from the elder. And for a fraction of a second, her right hand, resting on the console, had moved. Her fingers had tapped out a complex, silent sequence on the dark surface. It wasn't a nervous tick. It was too precise, too structured. It looked like data entry, a cold, alien thought solidified within Zyler's consciousness. They weren't just watching, they were recording. The thought was absurd. What could they possibly be recording? Their own translators, like those of every species, logged the public discourse. But Thorne's focus hadn't been on the words. It had been on the biology, the flash of feathers, the involuntary shriek, the pheromonal spike. Over the next few weeks, Zyler became obsessed. It dedicated a significant portion of its distributed consciousness to observing the human delegation, not just in the assembly hall, but in the wider corridors and plazas of Citadel Prime. The humans were models of decorum. They were polite, unobtrusive, and they kept to themselves. They moved through the station's multi-species crowds with a quiet efficiency that Zyler now began to see in a new light. It wasn't timidity. It was caution. It was the careful tread of one who walks in an unfamiliar forest, mapping every sound, every shadow. Zyler used its diplomatic clearance to access the public sensor logs for the human embassy. The embassy was a standard module, unremarkable in its design, but its energy signature was peculiar. It was swathed in a layer of low-level electromagnetic interference, a white noise field that was just subtle enough to be dismissed as poor engineering, consistent with the perception of humans as technologically adolescent. But to Zyler's analytical mind, the field was too uniform, too perfectly imperfect. It wasn't a flaw, it was a screen. Zyler decided to approach Elder Phelan. It found the Cathar preening its stress feathers in a quiet arboretum overlooking the station's main fusion core. "Elder," Zyler began, its voice a series of modulated light chimes that the universal translator rendered into the Cathar's sibilant language. "I wish to discuss the humans." Phelan's crest gave a slight, irritated twitch. "The silent orphans, what is there to discuss? They are a nonentity, a curiosity." "Silence is what concerns me," Zyler pulsed. "I have observed them, closely. I believe it is not born of fear, but of purpose." "Purpose," Phelan chirped, a sound of incredulous amusement. "What purpose could a species that still uses chemical rockets for in-system travel possibly have in the Concordiat, other than to learn from its betters?" "That is precisely my point. They are learning, but I do not believe they are learning what we think they are. During your compatriot's distress in the assembly, I observed Ambassador Thorne. She was not watching the debate. She was watching the biological reaction. She cataloged it." Phelan stopped preening. He turned his head, his large, dark eyes fixing on Zyler. The feathers around his neck shifted from calm blue to a wary yellow. "Cataloged? What do you mean?" "I believe they are studying us. Not our cultures, not our technologies, our biology, our nervous systems." Cathar let out a soft hiss of disbelief. "That is a disturbing thought, Zyler, and baseless. Why would they do such a thing? What use is the knowledge of a Cathar's synaptic pathways to a species of soft-bodied mammals?" "I do not know," Zyler admitted. "But their silence, their obsessive observation, the anomalous energy signatures around their embassy, the data points are starting to form a pattern I do not like. Their gaze is not that of a student, it is that of a dissector." Phelan shuddered, a motion that rippled through his entire body. The Cathar were a prey species from their home world, a planet of hypercarnivores. The instinct of being watched, of being assessed by a potential predator, was buried deep in their genetic code. This is paranoia, Xyler. You Glyptons, you see patterns in everything, even cosmic dust. The humans are harmless. The seed of doubt had been planted. Xyler knew it. For a species governed by empathy and instinct, the suggestion of such a cold, clinical violation was a potent poison. Xyler dedicated more resources to its investigation. Bypassing the public logs, it tasked a subroutine with a deep, passive analysis of all energy transmissions around the human embassy, looking for a flaw in their electromagnetic screen. For months, it found nothing. The human shielding was maddeningly effective. They were hiding something, and they were hiding it well. Then, a cosmic coincidence provided the key. A Class 4 solar flare erupted from a nearby star, bathing Citadel Prime in a wave of high-energy protons. Most systems were shielded against such events, but the sheer force of the storm caused momentary, microsecond fluctuations across the station. For less than a nanosecond, the human's white noise field flickered. It was enough. Xyler's waiting subroutine snagged a burst of data that leaked from the embassy's core network. A single, heavily compressed packet, jettisoned into a shielded buffer during the power fluctuation. It took Xyler's full processing power 3 days to decrypt the packet's outer layers. What it found within made its internal light dim to a cold, ominous gray. It wasn't a diplomatic communique. It wasn't a cultural exchange file. It was a data model. A terrifyingly detailed, dynamic, and interactive model of the Cathar nervous system. Xyler projected the model into its own consciousness. It was more than a simple anatomical chart. It was a functional simulation. It showed the primary neural clusters, the hormonal glands, the pathways of their empathic broadcasts. It mapped how external stimuli, a specific frequency of light, a particular resonant tone, a complex pheromonal compound, could trigger precise reactions. There were annotations, written in a stark clinical human script: target, Cathar central emotional locus. Stimulus, 715 nm light pulse 14.4 Hz frequency. Result: cascade failure of flight or fight response. Induces temporary catatonia. Estimated duration, 3.5 standard minutes. Target, vagal nerve cluster analog. Stimulus, inhaled aerosolized agent compound X12. Result: suppression of empathic broadcast ability. Isolates individual from hive consciousness. Psychological effect: extreme paranoia and disorientation. Target, plumage chromatophore control gland. Stimulus: broad-spectrum sonic burst, 30-35 kHz range. Result: forced flush of all chromatophores to submissive white. Overrides all voluntary emotional signals. Universal species-wide sign of surrender. Xyler felt a wave of something its species rarely experienced: revulsion. This was not a study. It was a weapons schematic. It was a set of instructions on how to dismantle the Cathar species, not with bombs or lasers, but by turning their own biology against them. It was a violation on a level so profound, Xyler had no word for it. They had mapped the Cathar soul, only to find the switches to turn it off. Xyler immediately sought out Elder Phelan. It did not bother with pleasantries. It transmitted the decrypted file directly into the translation buffer of Phelan's private chamber. The Elder Cathar was silent for a long, terrible moment. Then, a sound emerged from his translator, a choked, ragged gasp. His magnificent plumage, once a vibrant tapestry of color, went completely, terrifyingly gray. He collapsed onto the floor, his body trembling, a victim of the very panic the human file had so clinically described. It took the Elder hours to recover, with the help of Cathar medics. When he could finally communicate, his voice was a weak, trembling whisper. They know our deepest fears, the frequency of our nightmares, the color of our surrender. This is only one file, Xyler pulsed, its own light a grim, steady warning. One packet snagged by chance. How many more do they have? What do they know about the Glyptons, the J-Cori, every other species in this hall? The horrifying implication hung in the air between them. The human silence was not the silence of awe. It was the silence of a hunter in a blind. They had spent 50 years not learning how to join the galactic community, but how to break it. Phelan, his composure regained but his terror now a cold, hard stone in his gut, looked at Xyler. "What are you? A distributed consciousness, a being of light and crystal. What is your weakness, Xyler? What is the frequency that can shatter you?" Xyler did not need to search for the answer. It knew, with a certainty that felt like a shard of ice in its core, that the humans knew too. The discovery sent shockwaves through the highest echelons of the Concordiat. Xyler and Phelan, moving with a desperate urgency, presented their findings not to the open assembly, but to a closed-door session of the Security Council, which included the resonant chord of J-Core Prime. The massive gas giant listened, its container humming with its slow, powerful life. At first, its resonant thoughts expressed skepticism. A single data packet, the work of a rogue element perhaps, a misguided scientist. To condemn an entire species on such flimsy evidence is illogical. "It is not just the packet," Xyler transmitted, projecting the data onto the chamber's main screen. "It is the context, the 50 years of methodical, silent observation, the electromagnetic screen around their embassy, the focused gaze of their delegates. This is not the work of one. This is a strategy. They mapped our surrender," Phelan cried, his voice raw. "They found a way to unmake us from the inside out. This is not science. It is the most intimate form of warfare imaginable." Xyler then brought up its own analysis. "I have cross-referenced the leaked data with what I can surmise about their methods. They are not using conventional scanners, which we would have detected. The primary sensors are the humans themselves. Their optical organs, their auditory senses, they must be augmented in some way we don't yet understand. They are organic, mobile listening posts of unparalleled sophistication. Ambassador Thorne's finger-tapping. It wasn't idle. It was a form of coded, somatic data entry. She was likely confirming or annotating the observations of her attaché in real time. They are walking, talking, biological intelligence platforms. The J-Corey's resonant frequency shifted, a deep, ominous thrum that spoke of dawning horror. To turn one's own body into a tool for such a purpose, it is alien, the Council agreed. The evidence, while circumstantial, painted a picture too terrifying to ignore. An emergency summit of the entire Galactic Concordiat was called. The summons sent to the human embassy was stark and unprecedented. It was not an invitation. It was an accusation. Ambassador Aris Thorne and her delegation were to present themselves before the full assembly to answer charges of systematic espionage and hostile biological intelligence gathering against all member species of the Concordiat. The day of the emergency summit, the Grand Assembly Hall felt different. The usual cacophony of a dozen alien languages was replaced by a tense, heavy silence. The air was thick with fear, suspicion, and anger. The vibrant colors of the Cathar were muted to wary earth tones. The Glypton's internal light was a cold, hard white. The J-Corey's chambers hummed with a low, threatening bass note. Every eye, every sensor, every psychic presence was fixed on the entrance to the human alcove. When the doors slid open, Ambassador Aris Thorne walked in, followed by her attaché, Kenji Tanaka, and two other aides. They moved with the same quiet deliberation as always, but it was no longer perceived as meekness. It was now seen as the measured, confident stride of something that held a terrible secret. They took their places, their faces as impassive as ever. The silence in the hall deepened, becoming a palpable force. Xyler was given the floor. With cold, crystalline precision, it laid out the evidence. It projected the decrypted Cathar nerve map for all to see. It showed the analysis of the embassy's energy screen. It replayed the sensor logs of Thorne's hands, her focused gaze. It articulated the horrifying conclusion they had all reached, that for half a century, humanity had been secretly and systematically mapping the biological weaknesses of every species they encountered. When Xyler finished, the dam of silence broke. A wave of outrage washed through the hall. Accusations flew from every alcove, a chaotic symphony of fear and betrayal. "Monsters!" shrieked a Lumini delegate, its light form flickering violently. "Deceivers!" "Barbarians!" hissed a serpentoid Sylthane. The J. Corey's voice boomed over the din, shaking the entire structure. You have come into our house as guests and have spent your time sharpening knives for our throats. Explain this treachery. All the noise, all the fury, focused on the small, silent woman in the human alcove. Ambassador Eris Thorne rose slowly to her feet. The hall fell silent again, a breath held across 100 worlds. Every being in that chamber expected denials, excuses, or perhaps a plea for mercy. Thorne gave them none of those things. She walked to the center of the dais, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. She surveyed the assembly, her dark eyes meeting the varied gazes of Glypton, Cathar, J. Corey, and all the others. There was no fear in her expression. There was only a profound, weary calm. "We do not deny the data you have found," she said, her voice clear and steady, carried perfectly by the hall's translators. "We do not deny our observation. Everything Ambassador Zyler has said is true. We have been studying you, in meticulous, painstaking detail. We have mapped your nervous systems, analyzed your hormonal responses, and modeled your instinctual behaviors. We have a file like the one you found for every species in this room, and for 17 others you have not yet contacted." A collective gasp of horror went through the assembly. Phelan's feathers began to tremble. This was a confession, more brazen and complete than any of them had imagined. "You call it treachery," Thorne continued, her voice unwavering. "You call it a violation. You see these files as weapons, as schematics for conquest. You are not wrong, but you are not right either. You have seen the what, but you have failed to comprehend the why." She paused, letting the weight of her admission settle. "To understand why, you must understand what it is to be human. Our world, the one you call a death world, was not a garden. It was an arena. For millions of years, our ancestors were not the strongest, not the fastest, not the most resilient. We were soft. We were slow. We were fragile. Everything was a predator. The beasts of the plains, the reptiles in the water, the insects in the air, even the microbes in the soil. We were prey, and we should have been extinguished 1,000 times over." Eyes swept the room again, locking onto the Cathar alcove. "We did not survive by evolving thicker hides or sharper claws. We survived by evolving a different kind of weapon, a predatory intelligence. We learned to understand our enemies. We watched them. We learned what they feared. We learned how they hunted. We learned how they bred. We learned the sounds that would draw them out and the scents that would drive them away. We learned the weaknesses in their bodies and the flaws in their instincts. Our minds were forged in the crucible of adversarial analysis. To be human is to be a strategist. To be human is to assess every new environment, every new being, not for its potential friendship, but for its potential threat." She turned her gaze to Zyler. "When we reached for the stars, we found you, all of you, beings of immense power, Glyptons who can commune with the very fabric of spacetime, J. Corey who live for millennia and command the resources of gas giants, Lumini who are pure energy. We looked at you, and in our most ancient primal instincts we did not see peers. We saw predators, larger, faster, and infinitely more powerful than any our species had ever encountered before. We were terrified, but our fear does not manifest as cowering," she said, her voice hardening slightly. "Our fear manifests as preparation. We came to your assembly and we listened. We saw the casual power you wield, the ancient rivalries, the deep-seated biological imperatives that drive you. We saw a Cathar panic, and we saw a system that could be exploited by an enemy. We saw a Glypton process information, and we saw a consciousness that could be shattered by the right frequency. We did not see these things with malice. We saw them with the eyes of a species that has learned, through bitter experience, that the only true shield is understanding." She gestured to the projected Cathar file. "You call that file a weapon. We call it a contingency plan. Our name for that file is Protocol KDE-01, De-escalation and counter-response to Cathar aggression, the sequence to induce catatonia. That is our non-lethal method to stop a Cathar fleet from charging into a battle it cannot win based on a panic-induced misunderstanding. The compound to suppress empathic broadcast. That is our countermeasure to a potential psychic assault that uses your own empathic network to turn you against each other. The frequency to force a surrender signal. That is our last resort to prevent a genocide, yours or ours." She looked directly at Zyler. We have a file on your species, Ambassador. It contains the precise resonant frequencies that could disrupt your crystalline structure. It also contains over 400 countervailing frequencies that could stabilize your matrix if it were ever subjected to such an attack. We never ever develop a weapon, theoretical or practical, without first developing the shield against it. It is the core tenet of our strategic doctrine. The hall was utterly, profoundly silent. The fear was still there, but it was being eclipsed by a stunning, terrifying revelation. They had not been dealing with primitive children. They had been dealing with the ultimate survivor, a species whose entire psychology was built around preparing for the worst possible outcome in any given situation. Their silence wasn't weakness. It was the deepest, most patient, most focused form of strategic planning the galaxy had ever seen. We are predators, yes, Thorne concluded, her voice softening slightly. Our intelligence is predatory, but the successful predator does not hunt to extinction. It does not kill for sport. It secures its territory, it understands the ecosystem, and it ensures its own survival. We have no desire for conquest. The resources of the galaxy are vast, and we are few. We want only one thing, to not be fragile anymore. To sit at this table and know that if the day ever comes when your logic fails, or your empathy falters, or your ancient traditions demand our extinction, we will have a way to make you stop. We will have a way to survive. She finished speaking and walked calmly back to her alcove, taking her seat beside a stone-faced Kenji Tanaka. The spell was broken, but the silence that followed was heavier than anything that had come before. It was the silence of 100 different species, simultaneously reevaluating 50 years of history. It was the silence of prey realizing that the quiet little creature they had ignored in the corner was, in fact, the most dangerous thing in the forest. Not because it was aggressive, but because it was intelligent enough to have memorized the location of every single trap. The emergency summit ended without a resolution. There was no vote of condemnation, no declaration of war. What could they do? Attack the humans? The confession itself was a threat. We know exactly how to dismantle you. Sanction them. It would only confirm their paranoia and likely accelerate their defensive preparations. The Concordiat was paralyzed, caught between a primal fear of what the humans had done and a chilling, intellectual respect for why they had done it. In the days that followed, the political landscape of the galaxy was fractured. Some species, like the Cathar, were consumed by terror. Elder Phelan argued for a complete quarantine of the Sol system. They hold a key to our very souls, Xyler, he had transmitted in a private channel. They can play upon our nerves like a musician on a harp. How can we ever trust them? Other species, a minority of pragmatists and warrior races, expressed a grudging admiration. The humans had laid their cards on the table, and the hand they held was terrifyingly strong. Xyler found itself in a place beyond fear or admiration. It was in a state of pure, crystalline analysis. It replayed Thorne's speech in its consciousness, examining every word, every inflection. It conferred again with Elder Phelan in the Arboretum, which now seemed less a place of peace and more a stage for their new, complex reality. "She is right, you know," Phelan chirped, his feathers a dull, anxious brown. "About us, our instincts can be our undoing, but their solution, their contingency plan, it is the logic of a monster." "Is it?" Xyler pulsed gently. "Or is it the logic of a species that has never known true safety? They have given us a profound, unsettling gift, Elder. They have shown us their nature. In revealing how they see us, they have revealed how they see themselves, as eternally vulnerable. Their greatest strength, this predatory, paranoid planning, is born from their greatest weakness, their fragility. We did not understand them before. Now we do. What do we do with this understanding?" Phelan asked, his voice pleading. "Do we live forever in fear that they might press one of their terrible buttons?" "No," Xyler replied, a new, complex pattern of light beginning to form deep within its core. "We learn. We adapt. The game has changed. They spent 50 years learning our biology. Now, we must spend the next 50 learning their psychology. They have revealed their doctrine. Never build a weapon without first building a shield. That applies to us as well. The knowledge they have of us is a weapon. Our understanding of their fear, their paranoia, their strategic mind, that is our shield." Phelan looked at Xyler, a flicker of comprehension in his dark eyes. You mean we use their own methods against them? I mean we must understand them as completely as they understand us, not to plot their destruction, but to ensure a balance. The old dynamics of the Concordiat, the paternalism, the condescension, are over. Humanity is no longer the child at the table. They are a new, fundamental force. Power is not just about ships or armies. It is about knowledge. They have their knowledge. We must now acquire our own. The story ended there for most of the galaxy. But on the human side, it was merely the end of a chapter. In her office at the embassy, overlooking the breathtaking vista of Citadel Prime and the star-dusted cosmos beyond, Aris Thorne stood with Kenji Tanaka. "The fear is palpable," Kenji said softly. "The Concordiat is destabilized. Was it the right move, Ambassador, to reveal everything?" Aris Thorne stared out at the swirling nebulae, the same nebulae the Cathar called their Genesis skies. "It was the only move, Kenji. Hiding in the shadows was a temporary strategy. You can only learn so much from a blind. To truly understand an ecosystem, you have to interact with it. We just introduced a new predator, a theoretical one, for now, into the environment. Now we watch, we listen, we see how all the other creatures react. What do we do next?" he asked. Thorne's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. It was not a smile of triumph, but of a chess master who has just made a daring, transformative move and is now waiting for their opponent's response. "Now," she said, her voice a low whisper, "the real conversation begins. The galaxy is much louder now, and we need to listen more carefully than ever before.